First, I will say that, you know, in these conversations, we've been doing a lot of talking about diversity and inclusion and all that stuff, and I would like to start by saying that these are just places to start. Like, we're not trying to necessarily solve, like when we come into a space trying to solve the problem in like an hour and a half, we're not going to do that, but I'd like to offer that we leave questioning or thinking about something in a different way, so that it kind of takes the pressure off. We don't have to solve anything, but we have to be willing to look for the answers, you know, within ourselves and externally. So the conversation about diversity, it's interesting because we're having it and everybody is highly engaged. Right? People who have artistic directors and people who have never come to the table before are at the table. But in terms of ballet specifically, I have the question about how are we not talking about the actual aesthetics of the form? Because for me, I feel like part of the reason why we have a problem with diversity in ballet stems from maybe its origins, right, and the aesthetics of it. So I'd like to turn to Peter first and then Donald. If you could talk a little bit about the aesthetics of and the heritage of ballet as a court social dance and its evolution.
Yeah, and I think you can look at that in many ways. There are even body types. There are body types that are traditionally ballet-oriented. Dancers with shorter legs were traditionally discriminated against because there's an aesthetic which involved long legs. Dancers that didn't have beautifully arched feet were discriminated against. And there has traditionally been a prototype, and that would be coming out of a European court system. We can blame Louis XIV for that. But I think that aesthetic has broadened with people willing to open their mind about taste and what they want to put in front of an audience. I mean, I think back to a time that Donald would remember when not even looking at an issue of skin color, but a dancer like Suzanne Farrell came along and she didn't fit the traditional stereotype at all. There was something about her that had different proportions, and Balanchine was able to change that look. At the same time, he was taking a dancer like Arthur Mitchell, who was a dark-skinned African-American dancer, and put him out there as Suzanne Farrell's partner. And, you know, I think the first reaction was probably like, that's not how it's done. We haven't seen that in the past. It was a dynamic partnership and a really pivotal work in the history of ballet. So the audiences in New York embraced it, and I think the aesthetic started to shift or broaden in a way. And I think the more that we can broaden that aesthetic, the healthier we are as an art form and as a society.
Donald?
Wow, I'm kind of stumped, actually, believe it or not. I'm going to go with this idea that you said that ballet is a European court social dance. And I think that has a lot to do with how we perceive ballet, is that it is part of the social construct of hierarchy, and that traditionally in Western culture and in America, that the people at the top of that hierarchy have all been white. And so the body types that we associate with whiteness are the ones that we expect to see. So we walk into the theater with an expectation that that's what we're going to see. And so when something, as Peter just suggested, when we see something that's different, it jars us. And then many people, which I've learned here, for example, in Seattle, people are uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And it presents this black body on stage, for example, in certain contexts will create uncomfortability for the viewer. And so I always wonder if are we looking at the dance because, are we looking at ballet because it is an ideal, it presents an ideal that has to do with supremacy and imperialism. That what it is that it maintains a a point of view, a perspective that is geared towards European superiority and imperialism. And so it's difficult to think, in order to accept other kinds of bodies in ballet, then we have to accept, or at least understand or move towards a reality that is inclusive, that is not about dominating somebody or being better than, but operating on a parallel place.
So, okay, so America is different, but in the European model of the nationalistic ballet companies, it makes sense that as a reflection of the nation, at a point, the ballet dancers that represented those companies in those countries looked a certain way. But then when we have the importing of brown bodies and the colonization, and the fabric of the nation starts to look different, that doesn't necessarily trickle down into that concept. So when I start to think about it, I go, well, you know, is it about a nationalistic representation that is about pre-brownness, right? So it's the national ballet of Holland or of France, but you have people of color that are a part of society, but they're not represented on the stage. The other thing I wanted to throw out there is that oftentimes we talk about the aesthetic of ballet as if it's a fixed thing. And in this era, it seems like it's fixed, right? So Balanchine changed the mold. Before that, in the 1950s and 30s, they were all short and stocky and tight. And before that, you know, it's fluid, like fashion almost, right? So hemlines go up and down, and yet for some reason we hold on to this concept of what ballerina is or what ballet is, and how do we start to wrap our minds around a change?
Can I?
Please.
The idea of the national, kind of a national cultural look in ballet. I mean, the question really, for me, sometimes seems to be that is it supposed to represent the culture? Is it, for example, here in America, does it represent, when we look at the stage, we see, oh, that's America. We have all of this diversity like it is in America. As America moves towards a majority country, then what we're looking at on stage, are we seeing that level of representation on the stage? Or is it completely about the dancing, what the body does? But clearly tied up in what the body does is there's a school of thought that says that it's not just what it does, it's what it looks like while it's doing it. And so, and in some ways it eliminates, if you go with that, it eliminates a whole group of people from participating. And those characteristics that would eliminate some people, are they really necessary to what it is that's truly valuable and important in ballet?
My dancer folk, can you talk a little bit about what drew you to ballet? Because I personally didn't necessarily see myself in it, but something drew me to it. It drew you to it. And then can you talk a little bit about when you realized that that image of ballerina or cavalier didn't look like you, and some of that experiential sort of background? Because I think that that's important too. Anyone?
Sure, I'll start. So I was fortunate enough to see my cousin dance in the Nutcracker on stage, and that's where I first saw ballet and fell in love with it. My mom said I was dancing around the house, she put me in lessons. But what I also experienced when I saw her on stage was the fact that she wasn't allowed to be a snowflake. And so even though she got to be on stage, I knew right away that there were barriers for her, and there would probably be barriers for me. And so as I continued to study, I often found myself being the only person of color, or I shouldn't say that, the only black person in the room dancing. And the same thing happened as I went to a company too. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I was going with that, but seeing someone on stage got me interested in being in the ballet. And I'm not sure if I had just seen the ballet without my cousin on stage, if I would have been so enthralled in the art form.
My mother took me to ballet when I was like 7 years old. I grew up with 3 brothers, so she was like, she needs to have grace. So I started ballet at 7, and I knew from the first ballet class I was going to be a ballet dancer. I just knew it. It was something about the music and the way you had to stand up. And Theresa and I went to the same ballet school. We went to Pennsylvania Ballet together when we were younger, so we were very good friends. We grew up together. And we had like the most amazing ballet teacher, Lupe Serrano. She was a principal dancer with American Ballet Theater. And I would tell Theresa, for me, because there was no one of color or a black ballerina when I was growing up that I could look up to. And our ballet teacher, she was what, Mexican?
She's from Spain.
From Spain.
No, Chilean.
Chile. And she had this tiny, tiny curly fro, and she had like olive skin. So to me, my teacher became my idol. And then I found years later Deborah Austin, who was in the New York City Ballet. And still, she wasn't someone who looked like me, but I just fell in love with ballet, and that was it for me. I mean, I knew right off the bat that's what I was going to do. And so I think what Theresa's doing at this moment is so important, because I didn't grow up with those role models. And so my students who are African American of color, I realize that it's important that they have those positive image in front of them. And it's time. It's like a Disney cartoon. I mean, does it make sense anymore when you see Snow White, really? I mean, is it really? Like, we can see it other ways. It's perceptions. And I know how my students feel when I'm in front, whether it's a black student or a white student. They're like, that's our teacher, So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I grew up dancing in Baltimore, Maryland. I actually started dancing in the basement of a church as a tap dancer. My mom was out shopping in the mall one winter, and she saw a dance troupe performing in the mall, and she said, my son has a lot of energy. I bet you he would like to do something like this. So for Christmas, I got tap shoes and about 10 tap lessons. So I started tap dancing, and I was actually fortunate enough to be in a school it was an all-black school, so there were only black dancers, but the ballet classes were very small. And so when I was about 12 or 13, my ballet teacher said to my mom, Kiyon's arms look really terrible when he's tap dancing, and he needs to learn how to hold them with better structure, and he needs to have better posture. So maybe if he just took a couple of ballet classes, that might help with that. So I started taking ballet. I was the only boy in ballet class, and it was immediately difficult. And from a very young age, I was always a child that loved challenges. I didn't like for someone to tell me that I couldn't do something or something wasn't possible. And so this was certainly one of the most challenging activities that I had experienced, in my young life at that point. And so I started taking ballet, and it just consumed me. I loved working on skills. I loved getting better. I loved seeing the improvement. And, I was pretty naive, growing up in Baltimore. My family didn't know anything about ballet. And so, I really wasn't, at that point, looking for role models in the dance world, people to look up to, because for me, at that point, it was just an activity. And then when I turned
When did that change? When did it change? When did you become serious and you were like, oh.
Yeah. So I started ballet when I was 12, taking classes as an activity. When I turned about 15 was when it was like, oh, this could be something serious. I met a teacher at the Baltimore School for the Arts. His name was Roberto Munoz, and he pulled my mom aside one day after class and said, I think that your son has some real talent and potential, but he's not going to get the training that he needs here in Baltimore, so you've got to send him away. Now, this was one of the first big challenges for my family, sending her son away at 15 years old to go live in someone else's house and train far away from school. And so this was the first time that I knew that this was going to be sort of a different kind of life and that it wasn't going to be easy. And then once I got to Pittsburgh Ballet Theater School, that's when it was like, okay, now I'm in the ballet world, and I'm looking around and I'm like, there's no one else here like me. There were no other black dancers at Pittsburgh Ballet Theater at the time, and I was just kind of learning about the ballet world and learning what was out there, and I remember I came across Albert Evans, who was dancing at the New York City Ballet, and I was like, there's the one, there's the person, he's doing the thing that I want to do, and how can I make it possible? But because he's doing it, I know now that it's probably possible for me to make it. So
what's interesting to me is that art speaks beyond the aesthetic, but also that representation creates inspiration, right? So there's like, you're just drawn to something because you love it, and then when you look for the space for it yourself in the space, you're like, I can't find it. And then when you find it, you can latch on, and it becomes a possible reality for you.
absolutely.
Another question I'll throw out is, okay, right, we're talking about diversity and all like that, but in the reality, is it the art, the technique, the artistry, that's the most important thing, or does all that have to come in a certain package for it to be recognizable, for it to be considered classic or traditional, right? So I'll throw in the idea of breaking the color line in terms of the corps de ballet as a possible place to start.
For me, when I was 14 years old, I went to American Ballet Theater School and for a scholarship, and ABT was like my dream. It's a classical ballet company. You do Swan Lake, Giselle, Don Q, all those things were what I wanted to do. But when I went to American Ballet Theater, I was 14 years old, I realized I would never be a Swan, I would never be a Willie, and I was devastated. I came home that summer and I was like, I'm not gonna dance because they don't see me like that. Like there was no way I was gonna be in the corps. So I saw, I don't know, like a year later I saw on PBS, they had Dancing in America, and it was New York City Ballet. And I was like, okay, I don't want to be a Swan, I'm going to be balancing, because I could do it, I could understand it. And I didn't have to be anything. You know what I mean? I didn't have to be a Swan. You know, you think of Giselle and you think of this pale, thin, white girl. You do. You have not yet to see, well, Misty Copeland will be the first soon to do Giselle, but you didn't see that then. So for me, classically, it's people having to change what they see. And I always thought that Balanchine, the choreographer, his choreography, lent himself to diversity. Because you don't have to be any kind of...
Because it's about the movement, it's not
about the
representation.
movement, yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, I love that you said that. I think it's good to recognize and honor what Balanchine did for the art form. He was quite progressive in every way. There was a moment when, again, back to Suzanne Farrell and Arthur Mitchell, they were supposed to do the Agon Pas de Deux on the Ed Sullivan Show, and the Ed Sullivan Show appeared and said, we can't have that. He's black and she's white, and it's an intimate pas de deux. Balanchine would not leave the studios without those two dancing that pas de deux to be televised. Hours of talks, apparently, and the settlement was to do it in silhouette, which I think was a triumph for Balanchine. It was somewhat of a triumph for the Ed Sullivan Show. But, you know, brave to be able to take a stand in a world that wasn't taking a stand. I was going to talk a little bit about Kiyon, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I was a teacher at the School of American Ballet when Kiyon came there, and I had him as a student in the summer course. And I had a room full of 30 boys that were all dancing really well. But Kiyon was the one that connected with his teacher better than anybody else in the room, and listened to me and nodded and applied corrections and showed me the difference and asked me another question after class. And I thought, in many ways, this is the best student that I have in the room and the kid that I want to accept for the winter course. But SAB didn't necessarily accept kids like Kiyon. He just came in a different package. I knew that if I took it to sort of this council of looking for approval for acceptance into the School of American Ballet, if we did a vote, people would say, maybe come back next summer and let's see how he does. So I just went in the last day and I just wrote accepted on the form. And so there was Kiyon in the fall, and people were sort of looking in the attendance books, and there he was nodding. But in a way, it takes people to say, you know, screw it. this dancer deserves to be in this program. There's incredible material here that should be invested in. And he's not as tall as the other boys we're accepting, but he's the best dancer.
And I didn't come in the right package, and that was kind of the story of my entire career, is not coming in the right package, But what I learned about myself was that I was a very good dancer. And I worked very hard. I worked harder than most people in the classes who were with me. And I knew that much about myself. And so I said, there are some things that I know I deserve, because I'm working just as hard as this person, and they're getting full scholarship, and my family is struggling to send me here because I don't have the right body, and that doesn't get a scholarship, And so, it's, our world is still rife with problems like this.
Okay, Peter, I want to go back to you because I want to ask you about breaking the line, the idea of the brown body in the line of white bodies, right? That the concept of uniformity. And then I also want you to tell me if you think that the package, there's elasticity in it.
Well, Kiyon's repeating what I said with the right package. There is no right package. There's an aesthetic that people had followed at the time that was the common package. But right is subjective, and it's our really prerogative to choose what is good, what is right, what is something that we admire and appreciate. So that's where the mold gets broken and where we move forward. Sorry, the first part to that.
The first part was the concept of breaking the line.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit here about some of the frustration that we're still putting everybody in pink tights, which just seems sort of odd when, people have different neck colors and arm colors and face colors. And there's a Gaynor Minden just came out with a line of pointe shoes that comes in different shades that actually match humans in our world. Not a pink that very few people match anyway, but there's different shades of tones of taupe and brown and espresso. But the line doesn't look the same anyway if you look closely. Some are taller and some are wider and some have shoulders and some have shorter legs and longer legs, and we don't look the same.
Conceptually, I get what you're saying, and yet you go to the ballet and you see what you see. Mm-hmm. So let's, real talk. Yes, it would be great if tomorrow we're like, you know what? Screw this. We're not wearing pink tights, flesh tone tights, kids, because that's what it's about. Because that's the point. That's the concept of the pink tights, right? To continue the line. But is ballet really ready for that?
So I think it is, because you look at a choreographer like David Dawson, we just did his Empire Noir, and many choreographers are just choosing legs with pointe shoes, and there are no tights. And tights are, I think, becoming a thing of the past.
But when we go to a heritage ballet, we're going to go bare leg? Oh, sassy. Scandal.
No, we're going to go back to pink tights in the short term.
So the aesthetic of the heritage ballet is fixed.
I think it needs to change, but it's currently fixed.
When I left New York City Ballet, I went to dance there in Harlem, and I switched from the pink tights to the brown tights. And it was the most liberating thing in the world. It was, because for me, my line was finally completed. Instead of the pink tights, I wish that could happen.
It's really funny. I was in Amsterdam and I was talking to Michaela de Prince, and it was just when Gaynor Minden had come out with the shoe, with the only 3 colors. But there's a real dark one, which is good. Mm-hmm. So she was like, oh my God, I'm so happy. I wear 3 pairs of pointe shoes a day, and I have to pancake my shoes. It's like it takes a lot of time and energy. And I was like, oh my God, the tool itself says that she does not belong in it.
Yeah.
The tool itself says that somehow it must be altered for you to participate in it. Psychologically, that's what you're talking about. Because when I put on my first pair, I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, I'm gorgeous. No, but it's the first time that you go like, oh my God, that actually looks right. And you don't even know that it's wrong because you're thinking it's ballet, and ballet is pink tights and pink shoes. But the minute you put on your flesh tone, you're like, oh wait, waka waka waka.
Yeah.
That's what it's actually supposed to be.
I think, Theresa, too, not even thinking of just the point shoes, but the whole rest of your costume. So if you're doing classical ballet, do you have to make sure your straps are your flesh color?
Yeah.
Do you have to make sure your hair fits the mold of what everybody else's hair looks like? There's a lot of things that you have to do as an individual that everyone else doesn't have to think about.
I knew you were coming.
You knew I was coming?
Yeah, I did. Felt it.
Well, I mean, the thing, back to your question that led into this part is about what is classical. I think that's what you were asking. And I think classical is evolving. I mean, or has evolved, and it will continue to evolve. Peter was saying about Balanchine, about his being very progressive in his thinking about things. But for years, people didn't consider Balanchine classical. They go, that's not classical dancing. I don't know what they're doing, but that's not it. You know, all of those ballerinas from the Ballet Russe, when Balanchine wanted to work with, they go, I don't want to, who is this whippersnapper? That's what Mia Slavinska said to me. She said to him, when they didn't want to work with him because he wasn't doing classical. And so clearly, at this point in time in the 21st century, we see Balanchine's work and his aesthetic as an evolution of classicism. It actually started at the beginning of the 20th century that we saw this evolution. You know, we say neoclassical now, but then what did the people like Forsyth and which do not depend on a uniformity. It actually, in some ways, relishes the differences. And, you know, jokingly, I don't know if everybody said this, but certain of my friends have said that just as Bill Clinton was the first black president, William Forsythe was the first major black classical choreographer. Because basically there's a black aesthetic in his work that's at work all the time. He certainly, what's the word? Appropriates.
I didn't want to say it, but
you didn't want to say it, yeah. But there's a kind of an appropriation there. So classicism is evolving, and I think maybe one of the questions in looking at this is like, well, breaking it down, what do you mean when you say classical? What are the elements that make us think something is classical? My ballet teacher used to say, and even at that age, I would say, I would think, what is she talking about? She was saying, if you can do ballet, you can do anything. You can dance any kind of dance. Ballet is universal. And that's what she would say. She was English. And I thought, no, I don't think that's true. You know, if you do that, you can do ballet. That does not mean you can do other kinds of dancing. And so I used to think of it, I would say, is she saying that ballet is like being Catholic, you know? And so, you know, like it's universal, that's the universal church, and that's the it was thinking like that. And so I think we have to, back to the earlier question about the court, what's the phrase?
European court social dance.
Yeah, European court social dance. It's just another kind of dancing. I mean, really, if we think of it that way. And I think it's difficult for people to accept that it's just another kind of dancing. Because how we are trained is ballet's at the top.
But its preciousness is the thing that makes it elitist. Like, it's exclusionary because it's precious and it's unattainable to certain people.
Yes.
So whether that was from the aspect of being a court dance, right, to it just being costing a certain amount of money and time to be a part of it, right? So there is a preciousness to it that says that is not for you.
It's not for you. Yeah, it's not for everyone.
It's not. It is. Sorry, darling. It is not for everyone. And the question is like going back to Balanchine. Okay, I think we're about ready for a shift, right? Technically, like in the timeline, it would be about now. Yeah. That you know, the aesthetic has already changed. Like, you know, Sylvie Guillaume just screwed it up for everybody, you know, with the leg and the foot and the height, you know, everything's like, you know, that didn't exist. Remember when dancers could be tight and it was okay? So that's gone, and now maybe we are pushing towards a new era. The other thing I thought is like when you were talking about William Forsythe and appropriating, because he had a lot of brown bodies in his becoming. Like the thing that pushed him over the edge were like these brown bodies. And I was like, does ballet actually need a brown body to shift it? Like, because Arthur Mitchell sort of kicked open a door in one way. And like if you're talking about William Forsythe and the brown bodies helping to like create this radical change, is that what we're talking about?
I mean, Forsythe definitely funkified ballet. You know,
What?
Ballet gained some funk.
But Erica, what was that?
I had a look. I got to do In the Middle Somewhat Elevated, and I loved doing that ballet. But I feel like when I performed, it was my experience as a black person performing on stage. And I think often what happens is if you are coming to a performance and you don't know, if you don't read the stage bill who says who choreographed it and when it premiered, and there's no picture of the person on to say what they look like, then you don't know anything about the black experience on the stage. So when Donald Byrd came to Joffrey, and if you don't know that much about dance, you didn't see his picture on there, you wouldn't know that it was a black choreographer necessarily. Unless you see a black person
Right.
on stage, you don't see it. There could be, I don't think this exists a lot of, but a black lighting designer, a black set designer, all behind the scenes, you never see those people. It's what you see on the stage that people are going to see and remember.
Anybody else have any other thoughts they want to add on that? Because I'm going to throw something else out there. Peter?
That's okay.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this a lot. And I'm thinking, okay, we're trying to create this change, and how do we do that? So I came up with this like radical thing. What would happen? Okay, Peter, I'm going to put you on the spot. Donald, maybe you too. Okay. Well, artistic directors. I'm going to talk to y'all.
Okay.
Okay. So what if artistic directors looked at their organizations as their home, right? So, you know, everybody has like a home, mother, father, house rules. There's a way we do things here. We don't do that here. That's not right. What if ballet organizations created their philosophy or their tenets of being? And perhaps it's like, oh, well, we are about diversity. We're about celebrating differences. We're about trying to figure out a way for people to be in this space and feel seen and represented within the context of ballet and whatever our rep is. But when they engage choreographers, they're inviting them into their home. And you don't let, as a parent, other people parent your children. There are rules. And so what would happen if artistic directors were like, we'd love for you to come here and work here, but this is how we roll. You know, we wear, you know, unless it's the look of your costume overall, everybody wears their flesh tone tights and point shoes. You know, hair can be an issue. Like, we've got some girls with different types of hair. That's something to consider. Like, what would happen if, because I feel like there's like a deferment? Is that the right version of that word?
Deference.
Deference, thank you. A deference to choreographers. Like, if they don't like that, like, I need to see her in pink tights, or she needs to look that way, so people can get boxed out because they're not of the aesthetic. So what would happen? Is that radical, what I'm suggesting? Or how do you feel about that?
Donald?
Wait, let me finish it. Let me round it out. So it sounds crazy because people are like, well, I'm not going to choreograph. And like, maybe this is not a place for you if you can't accept that. And then choreographers might walk away. But if all the artistic directors that are saying we're about diversity and we're about celebrating, you know, diversity and having these different bodies and shapes are in our organization, if everybody took that stand, then choreographers would have to come in and go like, well, I'm going to have to think a different way about what I'm going to create for you. That's the end of it.
I think it's not as simple as that.
Okay, okay.
Because
talk it
I
out.
think I was thinking earlier about, do you call it internalized racism or do you call it internalized balletism or something? It's a kind of internalized notions about what ballet looks like. Not what ballet is, but what it looks like. And so in terms of what we're talking about right now, in terms of contemporary ballet in the 21st century, latter part of the 20th century, you can have diversity. There's a kind of opening for it to kind of sneak in.
Right.
But when you're looking at those 19th century dollies, as a friend of mine calls them, you know, it's less room for people to think more openly or more broadly about what ballet is. Because we all have, I'm going to say we all, it's an assumption, I don't know if we all, but the assumption that ballet is a certain thing. We think white tutus, I don't care how, we think white tutus, white girls, pink tights, point shoes. That's what we think. We do not, if you kind of are really honest with yourself, you'll say that's what you think ballet is too. Whether you like that or whether you think that's always should be true is beside the point.
Right.
But the first image, the first impression is that's what it is, a tiara. Even the language, Ken Stoll used to say the funniest thing that I loved. He said, everybody wants to wear the tiara, you know, meaning that if you are to be the focal point, you need the tiara. So classical ballet is tutus, white skin, pink tights, tiara.
Googled it. No, I'm kidding.
Like the music box.
Yes, like
Yes.
the music box.
Peter?
To react to that, I think you're very wise to sort of point a finger at artistic directors, not accusatorily, but everybody can be on board about the need for diversity and change in our world. But there are certain people at the point of entry that really, you know, it's probably Anna Wintour that is choosing who's going on the cover of Vogue. And that's a really big decision. It's not that the board at Vogue supports that. Somebody's going to say, I want her on the cover, and that will change how people look at the magazine and see themselves for their futures. So artistic directors, it's also lighting designers and choreographers and faculty members and dancers. And I mean, the list goes on about the decisions that they will make or influence. So the people who do auditions for schools, this is a point of entry where it's so important that the person that you're sending out on that audition knows that we're not looking for just this. We're looking for spark, talent, and we were looking for something maybe different than what we were looking for yesterday. And that's when the world starts to change and ballet companies start to change.
But do you think that's a possibility?
I hope so. I'm banking on it.
But Peter, do you think that, I mean, often since ballet institutions are the largest dance institutions in the country as opposed to contemporary ones, your boards have an impact on what you do as well. So not only the artistic director has to be on board, but the board has to be on board to help bring the audience along so that people know that it is a commitment that is part of what Theresa was referencing earlier about core value. That's a core value of what it is that we do. It's not a fad, something that we're going to put on and do now, but it is important to who we are and who we'd like to be in the future.
And the board should also be diverse, which hopefully we're seeing happen. But I think, you know, a board's it has to be sold a vision, and it's an artistic director's job to sort of present that vision and make sure that diversity is part of it. And also a board wants a balanced budget. So if you can do this successfully and, you know, meet with an audience, have an audience show up and see themselves on stage and then buy more tickets, it's a positive.
But my question is that what would happen when you're talking about bringing in choreographers? I mean, like, that's really the question. It's like, bringing in choreographers and going like, these are our core philosophy, and you have to follow, these are the guidelines, and this is important to us.
And I don't know if people do that. I mean, I've hired 2 choreographers on this panel, so I can ask them. Basically, for me, it's I won't interfere. I want their vision to be what happens. I'll draw the line with, are you going to hurt the dancers? So,
right, but that's exactly my question, though. Is there not? And I'm really asking the question because I'm neither a choreographer nor an artistic director. So I don't know, I've never been in that negotiation. But my question is like, it's a negotiation. Oh my God, don't you feel like we're like I'm Comey now. But it's a negotiation. So it's like, you know, can you do that? Like, is that a way of getting to the change? Because I feel if we're always going to defer to what the choreographer is wanting, then maybe it's not making, maybe those core values aren't making it to the stage in a complete and holistic way. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm throwing it out there. It would be radical. Is that what you're saying?
Personally, I wouldn't want to influence what a choreographer brings to the table. I wouldn't want to get in the way. I wouldn't even want to say, Kiyon, I want this piece to celebrate Black values. I wouldn't even do that.
No, not in that. I'm just saying, like, okay, well, when you're doing casting, people have preference, and we know. You go like, oh, I like that girl, I don't like that girl. For instance, there was a scenario where the artistic director would allow a Black ballet dancer to wear her flesh tone tights for all the ballets, and then a choreographer that she was going to wear, it was la bayadere, you know, it's the midriff, and the choreographer didn't want her to wear her own flesh color tights, and she had to wear pink tights, and she said, I felt horrible. She goes, I just knew I looked stupid. And so in a scenario like that, I'm saying it's a small thing. It's a big thing to her, and it's a big thing as a reflection of the values of the company. Would it be possible for an artistic director to go, yeah, no, she's going to wear the flesh tone tights?
Yeah, there you have a negotiation.
Okay.
Because I really see a choreographer as the controller of that ballet, and if I disagreed with what he was making somebody do, and it was uncomfortable to that dancer, that becomes a negotiation. I mean, that's standing
now
up
it is
for
a Senate
somebody
hearing, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay.
The thing that I think that's perhaps that's at the root of what you're saying, asking, or you're wondering about is the vision of that vision is the operative word, that it requires vision not only on the part of the artistic director, but it requires vision on the part of the board, which manifests itself in the entire organization. And so everything that the organization does, whether it's being articulated by the artistic director, the president of the board, or whoever it is, that they are really clear that's what they are about. That's what the organization is about.
Which is exactly what the second part of this whole discussion gets into, right? It's like that holistic sort of change or push towards equity and justice, right? Mm. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, because the other thing about diversity in these conversations and aesthetics is the idea that representation breeds inspiration. So there's a question of like, well, where are the brown ballet teachers? What about brownness in your administration, your staff, faculty? Like where is that, and what role does that play? So my teachers and some program director, like, can you speak a little bit about your experience as, well, you can take it from a couple different directions, because you've all had Black ballet teachers coming up. Was your ballet teacher, Kiyon?
My ballet teacher.
Okay, so, and then you also have been teachers.
Right,
so
the majority of my teachers were not Black.
I had Arthur Mitchell, so.
Well, then I will say that I started.
You didn't ask me.
What about you, Donald?
About my ballet teachers.
Were your ballet teachers Black?
Some were.
Oh. Peter?
Dolores Brown was one of my teachers.
Oh, okay. So
Back in the day.
the Philly connection.
Okay.
Okay. So I did actually. She didn't look Black though. She looked white. But if you called her white, she would just be like, I'm just as Black as you. Marion Sujet, from Philadelphia. So I sort of, my first point of entry for ballet, or falling in love with ballet, was through a black woman who looked like she was white, but would tell you she was black. And she made us study pedagogy 15 minutes before every class. And I fell in love with the technique of it, the science of it that way. And then I was at Dance Theater of Harlem, and I knew that the first time I ever saw Dance Theater of Harlem, I actually performed with them. They were in Philly doing this show, and they had children in the show. And I was like, oh my God, that is me. And it really did, the authority of having someone that looks like you in front of you, giving you the thing that you love, it's transformative.
Do a lot of you know who Arthur Mitchell is? Okay, so he has this larger-than-life personality, right?
Yes.
He just comes in the room, and I met him when I was 12 years old, and he was just he was everything that I thought ballet should be. And he makes you believe that you can do anything. That's his greatest gift, is to make you know who you are. So when I went to Dance Theater of Harlem, I was very shy, and I wasn't sure of who I was, and I was coming from another company, and Mr. Mitchell just shook me. He intimidated me. I used to shake before I would take his class because I wanted to be everything he wanted me to be. But I know what being in front of him in front of me did for me. I became the best dancer I've ever been under him. And I don't know why it was that way. It took a black man to make me realize who I was. And I have nothing against my white teachers. It's just that they couldn't touch me the way he could, like in my heart. They couldn't, you know what I mean? They couldn't do that. It was just different.
I think that validation, my validation from a black man came from a choreographer that I had been choreographing for a while, and people would ask me what I did. I say, well, I'm trying to be a choreographer, is what my answer always was. I'm trying to be a choreographer. And when Alvin Ailey asked me to create a piece on the Ailey Company in 1988, and he would come into my rehearsals and sit next to me, and he would say, he was another larger-than-life person, and he would say, "You do such marvelous things." And then I would say, okay, Alvin Ailey said I do such marvelous things. So maybe I'm not trying to be a choreographer. Maybe I am a choreographer already. And that changed my life, that experience. And so this idea of having somebody that's like you, even may seem on a very superficial level, but they share a certain struggle, I think. You know that they have some understanding of what you are going through and where you might have come from. And so that validation really makes a huge difference.
Erica and Kiyon, you work with the youth, and you are that person for them. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
So I teach in PNB's Dance Chance program, and I used to think for a long time that the biggest gift that I had to give was my performing talent, being on stage and sharing that gift with the audiences. And I'm slowly realizing that I have a bigger gift, and that's being a role model for young men of color in ballet. I teach probably 20 or so boys, and half of them are black. And I think that seeing me in the front of the room and me being really live and in living color for them, they really see that, wow, Mr. Gaines was a ballet dancer, and he can teach it to me now. And that's something now I can do, because I didn't have that when I was growing up. I didn't have someone who was in the room who looked like me every day with me, teaching me these things, and so it was like, well, maybe I can do it, or maybe I can't, but I am that thing for them. And so I hope that, I am setting a good example, and I hope that they can really use me as a role model.
Erica.
Yeah, when you asked that, I had an epiphany, because I realized I didn't have black teachers growing up. I had
When I was like 12, I was at Homer Bryant's. My mom would drive me back into the city, and Homer would teach me. But I wasn't with him for a long time. You guys know Homer. But I never had anybody that looked like me, male or female, in front of the room. And now that you say that, even going to like SAB, Royal Winnipeg Ballet, San Francisco Ballet, ABT, I went to all these summer intensives, and no one there that had authority to teach me what to do looked like me. That I really missed out. Especially if you're saying you had that great experience. And I know when I went to Homer's studio, it was the first time I went to a studio where a bunch of people looked like me too. And it was cool.
What is that difference? I mean, like, I think that we talk about this. One of the things, we're talking about diversity and getting, you know, brown bodies in these spaces. And what I'm interested in the work that I'm doing is to share the humanity of what that actually means. Because I think that it's a numbers game, and it's like the picture has to look right, but we're not talking about the actual human experience often, and what that is to be isolated, or what that is to feel as though you are always out of place.
I can talk very clearly to that. So I was thinking about that today. So this might sound obvious, or maybe it's not obvious to people, but if you're a black person and you walk into a store, people might look at you differently. People might watch you, even if you look like you're put together. I experienced that today. And that's me going into a place trying to spend my money. It's kind of the same experience. When you walk into the room and no one looks like you, and they're looking at you not the same way, like you're gonna do something bad, but is she gonna be good enough?
Ooh, you took me down.
And it's rough because you think you're used to it, or you think you're like, I'm strong enough, I can handle this, because it's part of your daily experience. But sometimes it's just hard. And that's not even, once you put on your ballet shoes and try to do hard combinations, it's just you being in the room and being who you are.
That's the humanity. And this is part of what everybody who is looking to diversify their student bodies needs to get. That we are sending children into this sort of environment, and they are alone. We were alone. We do it because we can, and we know we have to. My question is does it have to be that way? Can we not figure out a way that it feels like a welcoming space, that it and it's gonna take a while before it seems normal, like where everybody's like, oh wow, it was always this way, right? But there has to be some thought to this aspect, and part of it is actually having a brown body of authority in the space, because there are secrets that we hold that we will not share, and we hold them until we're in spaces like this, or we have a mentor and we have a place to put it, and it is a weight. And this is another reason, like it takes so much strength. Forget technique and artistry, having the right body, you should be cute, and getting to the point where you can get in that, you have to survive that. You have to survive that spiritually. And I think that that's a huge part that gets missed in this conversation. Go ahead, Andrea.
What was I gonna say?
I don't know.
When I was so ready to be in an environment where I was with my own people. We grew up in a ballet school. There was probably like 5 of us in the ballet school. It was a predominantly white school. But I joined the New York City Ballet, and it was very trying to be in that company. I was honored, but it was also trying. And it beat me down. You know, it was just a hard time. I mean, I was grateful to be in the New York City Ballet. I was grateful to do the Balanchine ballets, but my spirit could not survive there. It just couldn't anymore. I was just broken. And so for me, when I went to DTH and I was around people of color and black people, it's like my student said to me, it's like going to a black family barbecue and you're like, yay, you know. It really was for me. It was an awakening, you know. I discovered who I was because I was around people who looked like me. My boss, my mentor was black. You know, no longer was it someone white telling me what to do or to fit in some kind of role. I was able to be who I had to be. So as a teacher now, I mean, I teach at a predominantly white school, but now I teach at a predominantly white school. But I will go that extra inch to get that child of color engaged or to let them know you can do this. I will cross the line sometimes. And my director understands where I'm coming from. She's like, okay, she has to do this right now. Because I will not let a child ever feel what I felt. That is why I teach. I love ballet, but I will never have another little girl feel like she didn't belong. You know, New York City Ballet was my dream, and I left. Because I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
I just had a talk with our artistic director, Ashley Weeder, yesterday. Because I found, like you were saying, being a mentor and a role model, I do feel like that's more important now in my role as Director of Community Engagement. Because I informed them that students just start coming into my office and they just want to talk, or they want to cry, or they want to explain what happened. And the academy office is down on the other side of my floor, but they just end up in my office, never talked to them or even invited them in. So I know he said that he wants to make sure now, when we do summer intensive, saying, this is the whole staff of the Joffrey Ballet. You feel free to talk to anybody about what you need.
Imagine when you were in a predominantly white ballet school and you were having issues and there was no one there that you were like, oh, who did you have?
My mom.
So when we're talking about this as well, I'm listening to all these stories, and you're still the only people who hold those roles. Like you know what I'm saying? There's one of you. There's one of you.
Oh, for me.
Brown you. Or you have another one?
Well, so for me, I'm very lucky. My department consists of myself, Michael Smith, who is a black ballet dancer with Joffrey Ballet, Linda Swayze, who is a ballerina with Dance Theater of Harlem, Evelyn Sanchez, a former student that I taught from our community engagement department, who's Latino, and another former dancer with the Joffrey, Elizabeth, who is white and totally believes in what we're doing. So I'm in love with my department. We all
they can spread out amongst.
Yes, and then all of our so for our programs, we go through Chicago Public Schools and provide dance and arts education. Not just ballet, we do a bunch of different styles of dance, but the majority of our teaching artists are of color, so that the students see a reflection of themselves in front of the classroom. I think also what's really important is that there's a perspective of why we're doing this work, at least for our community engagement department. All of us have gone through undoing racism training, so we know as we speak to the kids in different neighborhoods who have different experiences than us, or even maybe the same experiences with us, we know why we're doing the work, and we know that we're just not going into the poor schools to do some good work, that we have a real perspective and a shift change, both
for our department, but also as an organization. A bunch of people are going through the training. And I think that speaks to what you guys were both saying about it being an organizational shift. It has to be the leaders at the top deciding that this is important and work that needs to be done.
Donald, did you have something to say?
Well, I'm still stuck back when I was hearing Andrea and Erica talk about, excuse me, and Kiyon experiences of not having predominantly white teachers or only white teachers, and this sense of what that feels like, and that kind of fits into a larger kind of model of what, excuse me, I want to say that it's a little bit like a colonialist structure. When Europeans colonized, went to Africa and other places, India, and they would snatch out, pull out the really bright kids, and then they would train them in their system. So in some ways, it became a method of undermining the indigenous operating systems that were there. And so, excuse me, there's water there, I can drink it, right? But so their experience is not unlike us, just in an arts context, a dance context, a ballet context. What it was like at the near the end of the Civil Rights Movement when young black people, and I was one of those young people that were taken from or invited to leave the communities that they grew up in to go into Ivy League and what do they call them? The elite higher institutions of higher education. And so what that meant in some ways was that you had to give up your history. You had to give up certain aspects of your culture and your heritage. And then I always thought of it, it was like once you left, then you could never go back. When you did go back, people could tell you were different. You had been changed by it. I said it's almost like you had the smell on you. And they knew you were not the same person that had left. And so, and you had to develop a whole series of strategies to be able to survive in that world. So being in these white institutions, I mean, they're maybe redundant to call them white institutions, just in these institutions that are white, that all of these people, all of us actually had to develop strategies for just being able to survive and hopefully keep our sanity. Because the look that Erica is talking about in those situations, you had to kind of build a whole series of defenses to protect yourself from it, which also meant in some ways other aspects of you had built a fence around other aspects of your life as well. And so you were not completely present to other things in your life. I mean, this morning I was thinking about E. Virginia Williams, who was the founder of Boston Ballet, and she asked me to come to the School of Boston Ballet to study. And she was a very nice lady, and I go, oh, that sounds great, blah, blah, blah. I went there, and I stood at the outside, and I looked at that, I go, I'm not going in there. Get out. Right. I mean, she showed me around, introduced me to people who was teaching, but the vibe that was coming from them was not, you are welcome to be here, please come in. It was like something else. And, at the time I was just going, I don't want to deal with this. I had other things on my plate.
You are so good. We should do Good Morning America or something, because I was just looking at my notes and I was like, what makes an organization Brown friendly? It's one of my key questions. Or how do you make your organization
behind making it
brown? Sorry?
Do you want the real reason behind making it more brown?
No. Not, well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, but because we're talking about bringing...
Because when you're talking about money, that's going to change the situation. I'm sorry.
No, okay, you're right.
When you're talking about dollars, things change.
So, okay, so let's change the question then. Why are you making it, why do you want to be quote unquote brown friendly? I don't know, that's not the right question, but you know what I mean? That is a good question because there is an economic branding issue.
Yeah, because, you know, now you have more, you have something that I was talking to Levine about. It's becoming more about who has money and who doesn't. Okay, the child who's going to a private school, who parents can afford to send them to a ballet school, they're African Americans now. That's the truth. It's a classism. It's not, sometimes it's really not about color, it's about money. Who has the money to make the opportunities happen? You know, what company is having, you know, more board members who are African American, who have money? New York City Ballet has 3 board members now that are African American. That is causing a change, a shift.
Well, this is America, so green is the only color that matters. Yes. But also, we demographically we are changing. So like it's inevitable. This is part of the problem. This is part of the hysteria, right? So something has to happen, right? It has to shift. The question is how we get it to shift, right? And the why is, I think, economic, and it's just like inevitable.
You know, I just read an article, and I'm going to try kind of paraphrase one of the things it said, and it was about just because an individual from a particular group has made progress, it does not mean that everybody in that group has moved forward.
Right.
And so what we have is we have African Americans, individuals.
Right.
But collectively, it looks pretty much the same.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, think about it. We're talking about diversity in the art form, and we just had a black president.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
Really?
Well, this is where we are.
Yeah, it's like we just had a black president, and we're still fighting this issue about diversity in the art form. The one place where it should be a little more open, art.
Well, I'm going to say...
I'm just saying. It's the truth, right?
I'm going to say that I feel like, I'm going to bring the good news, y'all. I do feel like this, because this is a cycle, this is not a new conversation style. Right. You know, people in here who have a little silver in the hair, they know. We've been here before, and we've talked about it before, and we've done this before. But I do feel like in this cycle, there is something different in it. I mark that by saying, by the evidence that it is the first time that artistic directors and board members are actually engaging in the conversation.
But don't you also think that the Misty Copeland effect has caused these directors who see how ABT ticket sales are like, boom, whenever she dances?
Absolutely. However, sometimes I don't even care why. It's just happening. Do you know what I mean? If we get caught up in the why of it.
No, I'm just saying that.
No, I'm just saying.
It is motivated a little bit by money. It's motivated.
Right, okay, but America is motivated by money.
By money, yes.
So everything is motivated by money. So if it's money, then fine. Money gets me in, give me some money. Let's start the change. But I'm saying it's happening. Shut up. It's happening. I'm trying to be positive and saying that it is happening, and I'm having conversations with artistic directors from not just in America, but from around the world. This is something that they're facing because of their own existence relies on it.
Yeah.
You know, there is a browning, and it's everywhere. You know, like I was just in Amsterdam, and they're like, oh my goodness, and you know Amsterdam has its own issues with, and they're like, we need to figure this out. And you're like, Amsterdam? Okay, that's interesting. Because they realize that it's inevitable, right? And whether it's money or whatever, they need, these organizations, this art form needs to become more inclusive just to survive. I'm sorry, Erica, what were you going to say?
No, I just thought you might want to mention, since you keep saying the artistic directors get together, maybe the specific instances like the Amsterdam meeting and convening.
Let's start with the International Association for Blacks in Ballet, which I think...
Blacks in Ballet, Blacks in Dance.
Blacks in Dance, sorry. I made it my own organization. This was the second year of the audition for black ballet dancers, female ballet dancers. And we had 15 directors, artistic directors, or organizations represented. And then I know the Dance Theater of Harlem did another convening that was held in New York at the beginning of February. And that was like, and we had some repeat people coming, like Ashley Weeder followed, we were like dating on the circuit. I was like, ooh, you again. And then the Dutch National Ballet just held a conference, an international conference. And it was crazy, like the Mariinsky was there, the Royal Swedish, all the Royals, the Royal Ballet, like I was like, why are you, the Polish Ballet, was like, wow, everybody's coming. It wasn't just about diversity, but it was heritage, identity, and diversity. But the conversation that was most like, well received and like caused a stir and everybody was talking about was the diversity issue. So there is movement happening. I feel very confident. I feel like conversations like these are really, really important, and I think that from the top, from the board, artistic directors, executive, the whole organization has to be on board. Peter?
Seattle's had an interesting approach of late because it's actually come from a government agency. The Seattle Office of Arts and Culture has reached out to all the organizations that they support around Seattle and not required but strongly recommended that they would like to have these organizations attend a racial equity cohort, which Ellen and I participated along with Katie Boljan, who runs our community programs. And it's literally training and dialogue, and it's hours upon hours. Our first session was about a 10-hour session. But we're in the room with the Seattle Art Museum and with the Issaquah Theater, and so there's a lot of voices at the table, sometimes multiple dance companies, sometimes multiple theater companies, but it's getting those conversations forward. And you know, we're not doing it because they fund us, but they do fund us.
Right.
So the money is part of this. And to have a government organization say, we want every arts and cultural organization having this conversation. It's important to us. And that resonates. And to hear that somebody else believes in it fortifies our belief as an organization.
And this is a perfect transition to the second part to the Beyond part of Ballet. So do you want to take it from here since you just sort of like started the jump off?
Do you want me to open it up to questions? Is that what you're...
Yeah, so are there any organizations here from the Equity and Justice Department? How are we doing that?
I don't think we have remarks. Is that what you're asking?
Oh, no. Okay, yes. Well, I guess we can open up to questions.
I just want, can I say one thing before
Yes.
you do? I realize something is that maybe another question that we might want to look at, might want to consider, is thinking of ballet like a, when there's a custody battle for a child, and it's kind of like a custody battle that's going on. Like, what's best for the child is really
Split the child in half.
What does the child need? And so what we keep hearing is what the different parents want. And so the question is, what's going to nurture ballet? What's going to allow ballet to continue to grow? What's going to broaden the aesthetic and the sensibility, and that and make it more possible for more people to receive what it is that ballet is? Then we have to think, then how do we do that? Not, do we want to preserve this old thing over there because that's how it used to be and that's the only way to do it, or we need to throw everything out and do something different because it just needs to be different. But really, what's best for the child, and ballet is the baby that we need to be thinking about its well-being.
Also, like, you do outreach programs, right?
Community engagement.
I mean, do you do like lecture demonstrations?
Yes, we
One
do.
of the best lecture demonstrations I've ever seen was Dance Theater of Harlem's with Miss you know. What they do is they, you know, he talks about how ballet began and da-da-da. But what a lot of places don't get, they invite the kids on stage. They'll put whatever like song is of the day, you know, I don't know, let's just say, you know, Jay-Z something. And they'll be saying, okay, so show us what you can do. And I think like a lot of lecture demonstrations are rather boring.
Wait, but then to finish it. So the kids do their
The kids
little
would do their
dance,
own social dance, and it would just get crazy.
And then they'll pick a movement out of that social dance and
To show
and
it's ballet.
show that it's relevant. That it's
See,
like, oh, that's a passe.
That's
like
a
if
passe,
it's
or you jump.
Sometimes
I
it's
think,
a stretch,
when
but you know.
people do lecture demonstrations. Yeah, but what I'm trying to say, if you go out there and do lecture demonstrations, you have to engage these kids. I've sat in some and I'm like, I wouldn't be interested in ballet. That looks boring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, somehow you have to ignite the mind to want them to go to ballet class. Today, ballet is competing against contemporary, lyrical, competition. This is not a good mix. It's bad. We shouldn't be together. But you know what I mean? Ballet is competing with this, like, so many kids want to go to those competition schools because it's like so quick, it's gratification quick. Ballet has got to appeal to, it's got to, I don't want to say hip, but sometimes I'm like, oh my God, this is so boring.
It has to be relevant. It has to feel relevant.
Yeah.
Maybe we should just give trophies out after every class.
Stickers. The kids like stickers. The little
A
kids.
certificate of participation.
Little kids get stickers.
I give stickers.
Yeah.
But like literally sometimes when I teach, I'll do a ballet class, and if my kids look like they're a little whatever, I will throw on Missy Elliott to do tendus, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, something with a beat.
I'm not mad at you.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments?
I do understand what a lot of the struggle is when it comes to blacks coming into the arena of ballet. It's because we've never had the understanding of how that world works. For us, it's more sports oriented. We understand, I have an older daughter that plays basketball, and for me, I understand how that world works. You go into AAU, they compete, you get a trainer, and you know, you put them in show meets, they get exposure. We understand that. When it comes to ballet, I have no clue what I'm doing. I have no clue what is the layout to make sure that your daughter is succeeding, and if someone is in fact not so much undermining her what she could be achieving, but not noticing that, like you said, you noticed that he was the best dancer. What do we do in those? Because you don't want to always throw out the race card, or, oh, you're holding her back, or this and this and that, and you can talk to the teachers and they just blow you off. You know, we don't know, because I don't know how my child is developing. When I come into the classrooms, we get to observe twice a year, and it wasn't until last year, the reason why I put her in is because she was homeschooled. She had no curricular activity, and she didn't like basketball at that time. So I put her in ballet, and she fell in love, and the teacher told me she was a natural, but I never got to see if, you know, my $160 a month was going down the drain, and you're just telling me because you want my $160. I don't know. You know? But when I went into the classroom and to see her within 2 months to have surpassed girls that have been going there, you know, they've been going there since they were little. You hear the chatter from the moms, and you know, they're talking about the teachers and how mean they are, and they had that teacher when they were little, and she's been mean, and nothing's going to change. And I'm like, you know, what am I subjecting my daughter to? You know, when it comes to the prima donna attitudes, I was really worried about that. But one of the things that I know that I made sure that I did was that I made sure that I researched black dancers that were doing it now, what they were going through, and that's when I learned about Precious Adams and
MOBBballet.org.
And I think his name is Mac Brooklyn, and you know,
Brooklyn Mac.
Brooklyn Mac. Some of those dancers that were out there, because I had to show her, I wanted her to see that first and be inspired by that first, before she gets into the world and feeling lost and feeling like, is it just me and you soul searching in the room? You know, and you're wondering, oh, there's another black dancer, do I connect with her now, or should we do it later when no one else is looking, and do our thing and kind of see what has your experience been. This has been my experience, because like you said, you get into those spaces and you can finally let it out. And even with her, you know, going and leaving home one day, because she does have a natural ability, and I don't know, like the summer intensive, inclusive? Is that the only way to go? I have no clue.
I'm gonna share with you
for doing what you do in the research.
I'm going to share with you my story. My father, I had a ballet father, not a ballet mother. And my father, he owned a janitorial business. He cleaned the banks and department stores in the Philadelphia area. And so I was at Philadanco with Marion Sujet, and she pulled my father aside and said, take her to Pennsylvania Ballet. She can be a ballet dancer. So my father did that. He had basic knowledge. I mean, my sister was in Philadanco, but, basic knowledge. He puts me in there, and he sits outside. This is when they let you see. Now they keep you away from them sometimes. He watched class, and he listened. And he was a religious, public broadcasting system, PBS, and he watched ballets. He learned terminology. I don't even know how and when he was doing this. He learned terminology. He could tell you from Nureyev to Balanchine. I remember coming to get rosin one day, remember the PPC, the rosin box was in the hallway. Mm-hmm. I step out, and he's like, you can pull your knee back on that frappe to the front. Shut up. You can get more elevation on that torture tape. What are you talking about? Wow. But you're doing, I get it. It's an opaque sort of thing for you. But CityDance, right? Read about it. You can read together. Educate that's the key. Educate yourself as your daughter is being educated. Right? Get into the world. I mean, this is another thing that organizations can think about, in that educating the parent as you educate the child. Mm-hmm. Not so that they drive you crazy, but just so that they actually understand what it is. You know what I mean? So you understand what you're looking at a little bit, and it's like learning a language with your child when they're little. You're on her level of understanding, and then you kind of grow with her. So she's not in there by herself. And just be interested in her and in it.
Theresa, can I give a shout out to the website, Memoirs of Blacks in Ballet? You make the point quite clearly in an article and also in the website itself that sometimes the historians didn't do their job, that there were great role models out there that were discredited. There might have been a Raven Wilkinson who was asked to wear enough white base that many people in the audience didn't even know that she was of African American descent. And so the stories got erased, and this website has people telling their stories and pulling out great role models in history that maybe were swept under the rug. So
we have 302 names of ballet dancers, black ballet dancers, past and present. So, like I said, mobbballet.org. You can go and click, I just did Kiyon's page today. All these ladies and gentlemen have pages, so I have artist pages. So you can go and click on his name or Andrea's name, and there's a bio there, and if there's videos, it's like a Wikipedia for black ballet dancers. So that you can educate yourself, and you're like, look, you're not by yourself. And it's a list that's still growing. And you're absolutely right. There is a lack of documentation of our stories because, we know how that goes. So that's part of the work that I am trying to do in terms of bringing back the history, making sure that what's going on now is documented and celebrated so that your daughter, you can go on there and go, what is that about? There's a timeline that goes from 1919 to present day. And it's not finished, it's still under construction, but you'll be able to go through a timeline and see different things that happen in black ballet history, right? And it's juxtaposed with world history. So you get an idea of what was going on in the world at that time. But yes, just stay interested and just constantly educate yourself. And it'll start to become clear. Yeah?
I have a quick question. I think when we accept black girls into companies like PNB or predominantly white institutions, we have to hold ourselves accountable. And so what does accountability look like when white institutions and white ballet schools accept black girls into their school? How do they make them feel accepted and safe? I mean, even when I'm walking around here and I look at pictures, I don't see representation, I don't see racial mirrors. So what can schools like PNB and predominantly white ballet schools do to make black dancers feel accepted? Whether it's visually, whether it's engaging the community, what can they do better?
All of the above. And that's something that we are working on at Joffrey, starting with marketing, like you said. Who do you see on the walls? Who do you see in your brochures?
Who do you see in the hallways?
Who do you see in the hallways? And I forgot. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, that's fine. It's fine. But it has to be, when we say organizational, it's not even just like the board and the top people. It's like, who's your receptionist?
Yeah.
What do they look like? The person that's greeting everybody coming in the door. Is the whole organization needs to reflect the community. And if the whole organization reflects the community, I think that's a really good start for everyone feeling comfortable coming in to the door. I also, like I said, I just talked to our artistic director about this. I don't think people, or at least our people at the top, artistic directors, executive directors, realize that it's an issue. I think this is new. I think them seeing that someone might be the only person of color in their class, and it's actually a big deal for them. I don't think that was realized before. And I agree. And so now we're having discussions about, this is a real issue. What can we do to help these people? Because we're now having those discussions ourselves.
But that's like the whole thing of making your organization feel brown friendly, welcoming. And I think that there's also like, it's not just about on the stage. It is in the administration. It is in the costume department, because there's so many dancers or students of ballet that don't become professional dancers but go into the field, right? So they can be administrators, or they can work in the theater in terms of like lighting or set, whatever. It's that exposure that will go like, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't want to dance, but I like production. But I will say this, what Ellen, after that Dance USA panel where we met, she was like, I get it. I get what you're talking about, and I get it in terms of gender. She says, I walk into a room and I immediately take note of how many women are there. And I said, right, and as a brown woman, I take note of how many women are there and how many people of color. So I talk about changing your eyes, right? Your eyes have got to change to start to notice what's not there and what is. And you have to ask yourself the question, is that okay? Because you could notice it and it's fine with you. You know what I mean? Like it has to feel strange when you're like, ain't nobody else like me here. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm.
If someone else was black that was there, it's like, you know what I mean? Because you automatically recognize that person as the competition. And the white people, to be honest, you being in white spaces, you know what I mean? You just kind of see them as a different type of competition that you've always faced all of your life. Mm-hmm. You know, you're just up against certain things. And back to what you were saying is that I think that the changing of the clothes and things like that must happen, but I think that ballet is probably the only art that is somewhat sport and somewhat an art. Where the competition is just always going to be there, and where there's competition, there's going to be discrimination. And when they see us, we kind of take on, you know, like you say, you know, are we automatically looked at as being almost ruled out? You know what I mean? Because you know that you don't have that, not so much that you don't have the it factor, but you don't have what becomes custom. Because when my daughter first started, she did the Nutcracker, and one thing that I did notice about the Nutcracker is that at the end, and I've only seen the Nutcracker once, and that's when she was in it, but at the end when they were celebrating around the world, and every world, or every country or every nationality did their dance to celebrate, there's not an African.
Okay, that's a good question, because, you know, there's a whole issue with the Nutcracker and the exotification of people in ballets, which is troublesome. at times. Like there was that article, "Is the Nutcracker Racist?"
Yeah,
You contributed to that.
I did.
What did you think?
I said, what did I say? I said, yes, it was racist. Is that what I said? No, he's back there. What I did say, I said that for the time that it was created, it was really, I think it's imperialist more than it is racist. Because it represented, the national dances represent all the places where Europeans were taking commodities from. And so it was glorifying the commodities that had come from these other places. So that all these other countries, these other places, they were all at the service of the European imperialists. That's what it was really about. At the time that the Nutcracker was made, originally, there wasn't a lot of, there had not been a lot of exploration into Africa and bringing out stuff that was being used in Europe and in Russia. So I think if the Nutcracker had been created later, just even a decade later.
So it's actually a good thing that we're not in there.
Did you ever see, someone posted this excerpt of Nutcracker with Mr. Mitchell dancing coffee?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I was like, oh Jesus, I'm gonna shoot myself. It was the most racist thing I've ever seen.
Yes. Yes.
I was just like, really?
But I think in some ways maybe there's an assumption, maybe we might say, it goes without saying that so much of what happens in Western culture is racist. You know what I mean? Maybe that's the place to begin rather than going, that's racist, that's not, that underlying it, all of it is racism. And not racism in the sense that it's necessarily, I'm gonna beat you down, but there's a certain level of there's a kind of hierarchy of race.
Yeah, a racial
hierarchy. A racial hierarchy, that's really what it is. And that, and I think it's important in some ways not to be, if you want to survive stuff, you can't be too emotionally attached to it. You can know it and understand it, but you can't have your emotions dragged into it. I think, I don't know why I've been thinking so much about parenting recently, but I don't know what that means. But I think that when your child is in trouble or something is wrong, you kind of have to detach emotionally so you can deal with it. Right. So otherwise you can't do it. If it's all up here, it's just like that's a dangerous place to be. So I think in dealing with race, we can. I've said what I wanted to say, so I'll shut up.
But I think that's, no, that was good. Good segue. We're a good partnership. I think that when we have conversations like this, that detachment is kind of necessary on the darker side of the fence, because it does bring up so much that we are a highly spirited people, and it can be overwhelming for white people to be in the space. They're like, oh my God, they're blaming me. It's a
and they're angry.
Yeah, it's angry, and then they get defensive, and then it just goes awry. So I think that there is a way of having these conversations where it's just we're hearing, like they're just human emotions coming out. They're not at you. They're just like, I'm expressing them, and you can take them as they are. I think that's part of getting through and not being afraid, of saying the wrong thing. Like you can say the wrong thing and then you'll be corrected, but not like attacked in the correction. Anybody else?
I remember seeing Ulysses Doves dancing on the front porch of heaven. And I sat next to a man, and he fussed through the whole thing. He said, they call that ballet. That's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. What in the world is that? Is that something new? And I said, nothing, and just sat there, and eventually he left. before the intermission, but I remember later I thought, why didn't I tell him? You're absolutely right. Everybody knows God turned off the creativity spigot in the 20s. But I wanted to say, if you see something and it's different, it's going to take time for people to get used to seeing something different. I mean, I was at my son's house and saw a basketball game. It's the only time we get to have fun together. And it was Mississippi State, and it was all black. And I said, don't I remember the time when you couldn't even go to Mississippi State? Right. And I'm thinking that if there is a reason, of course, in that case, it's probably money, but I think you can get used to seeing something that's different, but the people in charge have to take a risk. I do know that in my daughter's situation, she was lucky enough to have a teacher who went to school with Carl Shook. They were very good friends, and he happened to mention to Arthur Mitchell that he had a friend that had a student that might be interested in the summer residency, and that's how she got turned on, and didn't have the body, short, very short legs, fat thighs, broad shoulders. And I think that the idea of having that perfect ballet body, that's going to have to be gradual because your sensitivities get used to a certain thing. But I think all of us have seen people that were heavy set and could get down.
I have one here, except I didn't bring my glasses. But to the panel, did you ever question your pursuit of a place in the arts? Did you ever think, why am I going through all this? Is it worth it?
Did you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I did. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Only
you
when
can't.
I was broke.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many roadblocks, you know, as a black dancer. I mean, that you can't even imagine that you face. You know, I mean, especially when you're a part of a predominantly white institution. I mean, things like just, you know, like your makeup's different, and how do I do my makeup? No one ever taught me that, you know, and where do I get my hair cut in Seattle? I just moved here from New York, you know, I mean, there are things that come up that people take for granted, you know, because all my friends go to G. Morez, and, you know, they share makeup, and I can't do those things, you know, and so back to your question about, you know, what can institutions do? I think that institutions need to be sensitive to how lonely it can be when you're the only one. You know, no matter how happy you seem or how jovial the situation is, you can't imagine how it feels to walk into a place every day and say, I'm the only one who looks like me. And no one understands the things that I go through, you know, when I leave the building also, so.
I have something about, this came up earlier, somebody said something, and I wanted to, about when you see another black person there and you feel like you're in competition with them. I think that's, I think it's deliberate. It's a strategy used to keep people apart. All of us at this table, all the black people at this table have spent most of our lives in situations where we were the only ones or one of the few, and I think it's a deliberate strategy so that you feel that the point is that you are isolated, and if you are isolated, you don't have any power. And power doesn't necessarily mean political power, but emotional power too. Mm-hmm. You don't have anything. So we've dealt with, when I arrived in fall of 1967 at Yale in New Haven, Connecticut from Clearwater, Florida, that was a shock to my system. That I have, you know, and so there's this thing that happens in order to survive is that you learn how to assess the landscape and how it's made up, and then you figure out what you need to do to survive in that environment. So to the question of whether you ever doubted being large, you don't have time to doubt it, really. You have down times. Mostly for me, they came because of financial situations.
That's what I was saying. When I was broke, that's
when I was broke, then I had doubts. You know, like when I had to sleep on a bench in Central Park, and then next morning go take my ballet class with Genya Melikova, you know, that's when I doubt it. Why am I doing this? Why am I suffering for this that I know is the only thing I will get from it, which is the thing that I wanted really, was this satisfaction of being able to contribute to an art form that I love. That's really what that's what I wanted, was to contribute. So I only doubted when I was hungry, or I didn't have a place to live, or I was broke.
One of the things that many people in this room know about is that PNB has a Dance Chance program, and we bring in about 90 kids from 23 Seattle public schools. I would be a minority in those classes, which is kind of wonderful to see. Kiyon teaches them. They have a teacher who is Asian, they have a teacher who is Caucasian, they have Kiyon, and some other teachers as well. But it is about 70% kids of color, and about 20% of those are African American kids. So it's a different landscape. It's not I can count them on one hand or just one finger. And also sometimes the person in the front of the room reflects the students in the room. And I think that is what will move the needle in our world, is when programs like that are really in place.
I want to say, I think it's really interesting. About the doubt, like, did you ever doubt? I think it's important to say that, like, being a Black ballet dancer is a human experience. So we have the same gamut of emotions as anybody else. So all artists have doubt and fear and moments. So I think this is another thing that gets flattened out about this conversation, even the Black experience, right? Is that all of a sudden it's like, it's not human. It's not just Black or white. You know what I mean? It's complex, it's complicated. Black people tend to be simplified, and we are just as complex, sometimes I think maybe even a little more based in our context. And we need to start having that conversation in that realm, right? That mental space of saying, like, it's every human emotion that non-white people have, it exists up here. So yes, we've had the doubts, but not necessarily because of the Black, like, that's a given. So if we had a doubt about the Blackness of it, we probably would have just stopped. Don't you think? Like, you'd be like, okay, well, I'm Black, it probably can't happen, I'm gonna move on. But I think it's just a normal level of doubt. I mean, that's how I feel. Did you ever want to stop because you was Black? Like, the Blackness, you did?
Yeah.
When you were at City Ballet? No? Yeah.
I mean, an incident happened to me there, I'm not going to go into it, that made me want to leave the company. And I was like, okay, I can't dance here anymore. And then I was like, I don't want to dance anymore because they're not going to give me a chance because I'm Black. And how could you feel that way? And you did this your whole life, you loved it, but this incident that happened there destroyed me. And I was just like, I don't want to dance anymore. I literally didn't even know how I was going to get up and go to work every morning. Yeah, I couldn't even get up in the morning and go to work. I was just like, I don't want to be here.
It's really crazy, isn't it? It's really crazy. I just had to say that.
I have a question. Why is it seemingly easier for a so-called Black dance company to accept the white dancers? I mean, it seems like they can come in and they're welcomed and they're just part of the family. It's like sports, the ball players and the dancers. The people in the arts seem to be able to get past the color. Maybe it's the people at the top that need to lead it. And I can't understand why it's so difficult to have Black dancers in the white organizations. I know Sarita used to say, and it just hurt my heart, she said, I remember being there and she was crawling on her knees and she had, her feet were just horrible and bleeding and everything because she was on toes. And she said, I don't dance because I want to. I dance because I have to. It's the only time I'm happy is when I'm on the stage dancing. And I thought, oh, where have I failed this child? That's so sad. But I mean, this is something that brought her great joy. And the other way around, they have, white dancers that join Ailey and other companies, and there seems to be no problem.
The African American or Black community, we don't really use the word diversity, unless we're talking to y'all. Because our communities are generally always have some level of diversity, whether it's the diversity of brownness, diversity of class. It's organic. It's just organic. So I think that like, it doesn't even occur. It's like, if you can hit the step, Donald Byrd will say that, if you can hit the step, then you can do the gig. Like, I find it interesting that Alvin Ailey, somehow, like he's telling the African American stories, right? The Black church, Revelations. I should do it. Right? How did he imagine that Chaya Matazumi from Japan, who had probably never been to a Black Southern church, could somehow embody that piece? Because dance is universal and it's a human emotion and it's a human experience. So he goes, can you hit the step? And he can hit the step.
And I think also that what's a part of it is that the values, that the tradition of modern dance or contemporary dance, the tradition is what is coming from here out is what's valued. And so if you can access something here, then you are welcome. The only barriers that white dancers usually would face in the Ailey company or in Black organizations like that they had difficulty expressing themselves, being themselves, because of whatever cultural challenges they had. And whereas ballet, and this kind of goes back maybe perhaps to your very first question, which I didn't answer, ballet places a lot of, traditionally ballet places a lot of emphasis on the external rather than what it is, like dance, the essence of ballet. Like what is the essence of it? And if you communicate that, we forgive you a lot of things. There have been a lot of great classical dancers that, if you look at them carefully or closely, you see that things are not perfect. But the power of their imagination and of their spirit transformed it. Now, what happens, I think, in terms of racially, is that Black dancers don't get the opportunity. They're not presented with that opportunity to dance the spirit of it because something about their external eliminates them from that.
But also I think there's something about like the idea that in communities of color, like, stay with me, take hip hop for instance.
Ooh, the Japanese.
You see a Japanese and they wear it out, they can hip hop, you're like, go. We actually celebrate the concept that you're not of us or it, and you can hit it. Whether it's a white girl, it's a Japanese girl with dreadlocks or whatever, you're like, wow, that's incredible. Come on in, and then then a Black person can't get another hip hop job, it's true. Go to an African dance class, you see that white woman with that lapa on, and you're like, okay, do it, Becky. You're hitting it. Like, I'm serious. And it's like, you celebrate it. I mean, we get a little mad because, like, after we say, get it, you're like, you're appropriating. But Black people are never celebrated in that same way for excelling in a Eurocentric art form or whatever. It's not like, you get it, Shaquan. You better double tour. Well, okay, that wouldn't be a white person saying it. You get it, Shaquan, that's beautiful. No, do you see what I'm saying? That's the stuff that we have to start to look at that stuff. You're like, why is that? That's really interesting. And yet somehow we code switch and we master that We have to in order to survive, right? But we don't get kudos for that.
You're watching Soul Train, you see like the white dancers coming down the line, you're like, this is Soul Train.
But he's welcome,
Yeah,
welcome.
it was fine.
So I think that's something to look at. Like, what does the spirit of your life look like in terms of inclusion? Like, what do you celebrate, maybe? Anybody else?
So I'm a dancer, and I've gone to see a lot of shows in a lot of places, and in all the ballet performances I've ever seen, I'm sitting in the audience, and there is probably like 95% white people, most of them old. No, it's awesome. It's great. I know, I love it. I'm wondering, how can dance companies as a whole try to change their content, whether that's dancers or choreographers or whatever, to become more inviting to all of, like, as audience members? How can we do that? Because I feel like a lot of what we do tends to really only be interesting for a certain class of audience members.
I'm going to jump in there. I will go to performances of Ailey every time they're in town, and DTH. It's an audience that we don't see at PNB, and they're there. And it's not that it's not part of the community. It's that there's a point of interest, or a choreographer of interest, or a dancer on stage of interest. But I think it's quite true what Miles says.
I think that's a really, the question is challenging, and the issue itself is challenging. Theresa said earlier, like, she said relevant, and I said, how can you make it relevant? But I think it's also more than relevance. People have to know that it's there. And I think that, and so I think a lot of dance, I mean, you know, the situation, I was talking to somebody, and I said, it depends on where you are. It's a different situation in Seattle than it is in New York. In New York, people know about stuff, and even if there aren't a lot of people, there's so many people there that you get a certain percentage and you still got a full house, you know? So that number of people are interested. In Seattle, it's an uphill battle. And it has nothing to do with quality of what the work is, or even so often with the relevance of what the work is. You know, a lot of it is like, how is it being presented? How is it distributed, the information about it, and then how are people informed about the nature of what it is? And for Spectrum, I mean, one of the most gratifying experiences was SHOT, the first show we did our season, because there were so many young people that came, all these high school kids that came, you know, on their own. They would come and then they'd bring their friends the next time, and they'd sit there and they'd cry. They'd do, you know, they were so present to their emotions about the subject matter, but it reached them. But I don't know how to replicate that. I really don't. I don't know what got, I mean, word of mouth obviously was a part of it. But it has to be the right word of mouth, like who's talking. You know, I think also with that piece, the image of it, it was clearly they were all millennials, and they looked like millennials, they were dressed like millennials, and so all the millennials showed up. Not all of them, unfortunately, but many showed up. But to me, that's the biggest challenge in Seattle. Because I think that there are two sides to it. One part of it is the impulse then to play safe, because you know, like, it may not reach them, they're not going to come, they're either for whatever reason because they can't afford it, or they're not really interested anyway, and so you sing the same song again to your regular people, to your regulars. And so in some ways it can inhibit risk-taking, adventuresomeness, and the opportunity to reach a group of people that you may not normally reach.
Tradition is what I see. They would like to go and see the same show every year, and they want to do that. Whereas in the Black community, we're kind of like, give me something new. Give me something fresh, you know what I mean? And so you got to keep that edge going and that edge there, and maybe that's just something that's not also being put in motion on some level.
But I do think that with the alien, it doesn't matter what DTH or Alvin Ailey Company does when they're here. Just that they're here, it says something that everybody knows that it's okay, 2 years ago they were here, and part of the company was away, and so I saw a matinee. Peter, I think you were at that same one, and about half the people on stage were white. And somebody said to me, I didn't know there were that many white dancers in the Ailey Company, and there's always been been white dancers in the Ailey Company. That's not new. But what it is, the event itself of celebrating blackness at a certain level is what the Ailey Company and DTH represent for people. So it doesn't matter what's on the stage, really, except that black people are representing. And and they are representing at a certain level, like you see high skill, you see physical beauty, you see all of those things, and we sit, when I say we, I mean black people, we sit and applaud that, because that is transformed, because the greater society does not celebrate our beauty, and it does not celebrate the fact that we are, the Ailey Company is the most successful modern dance company in the world, even more so than Batsheva. That's remarkable. I mean, when I was at the Ailey School, the doors were about to be shut down every week. That's how it felt.
I also think it speaks to the same experience of if you're going to a place and you know people that look like you're going to be there. Does that feel comfortable to you? Mm-hmm. Or you're going to go somewhere and you're going to be the only person. And I know we've had that conversation too. It's like, if I'm going to go to a ballet, do I have to be, how am I going to dress? Where am I going to sit? Do I clap after every dance? If I like something really at Ailey, people are like, woo, yeah, like during the show. And you're like, are you kidding me? That's another discussion. But like, do I feel comfortable doing that? I really like that dance step, but I'm not going to say anything right now. I think it's totally different audience experiences and finding where people feel comfortable going to.
But it's also the spirit. It's a different energy and a different spirit to those things, those different performances, right? You feel like, I don't know, like as a black person walking into Ailey, I mean, it's like, okay, I'm gonna go see the people. But I think that maybe non-African American people, because it's not their experience, they feel like it's it's entertaining, it's exciting, it's inviting, it's inclusionary, and can ballet feel that way? Can ballet feel that way? I mean, does ballet want to feel that way? Because part of it hinges on that elitism and that it's not for you. So if you constantly tell people it's not for you, then why should they come and see you? Right. Do you know what I mean? So that's the catch-22.
But the thing about the celebratory part of it, in the 19th century ballets and the variations, people yell and scream and clap and go crazy. I mean, they used to do it more than they do it now, that people would go, the show would stop. Sometimes, and now they kind of a little and then it kind of goes on the bow.
So polite. So polite.
Yeah, but I do think there is. I'm going to say something. I came to a performance of PNB when they did Stravinsky Violin Concerto, and there was a young lady that danced in the fourth movement, right? The kind of Russian kind of thing. She's kind of back there, and I kept looking. Is that a black girl? Because I hadn't seen her before. I thought she was fabulous. I thought she was fabulous not because she was black, but because of her spirit. Her spirit was fantastic. And I think I wanted to cheer for her because she was dancing and there was joy in that dancing. And that's, how I remember that ballet when it was first created, was that there was joy in it. Mm. It took you from the beginning of the ballet, from the first movement, all the way to the end. You went through a journey. And so she reminded me of what the journey was.
It's good to wrap up, right?
Yeah, I'm worried they're going to shut the lights off on us soon. But
Thank you all for coming, and I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation for the community at large, but I hope you walk away with some thoughts and some questions, and that you keep it going and you pass it on like there's a ripple effect, and that hopefully you're fired up and you keep looking for the change and you keep demanding the change and vocalizing the need for the change, because that's look, nowadays we are the democracy. Democracy works when the people work the democracy. So the same thing works for diversity. So thank you.